All right, welcome to Tools to Strengthening Your Workforce, presented by Disability Solutions in partnership with the House Skills. This webinar will include some actions to help your workforce develop the skills that will serve them in the current role and throughout their career. These tools will help them be more successful, more effective, and happier while improving retention for the talent of you. A few items before we begin. In order to reduce some background noise, all participants will be on mute. There will be an opportunity to ask some questions at the end of the presentation. All you gotta do is hover over that menu bar and you'll see the Q&A button. Type it in there. I'll be happy to answer it at the end. And we'll also provide you with our contact information if you wanna reach out to us after. With all that said, let's get started. My name is Kevin McCluskey, and I am the Director of Partnership Development with Disability Solutions. I'm responsible for developing and managing federal, state, and local talent partners to help the business and hiring goals of Disability Solutions employer clients. I also work directly with employers to educate them on the benefits of hiring talent with disabilities, and also provide them tools to help them best engage and support potential and current employees with disabilities. I've been working directly with Pepsi and the Pepsi Act initiative for about 8 years now, who actually earlier this year won the first ever gold award in disability inclusion, which was given by the Department of Labor. My co-presenter today is Paige Porter. She'll introduce herself and her organization in just a second. So I am from Disability Solutions, and we are Disability Solutions at Ability Beyond, as you might see in the bottom right logo. Ability Beyond is our parent company. It's a nonprofit based out of Connecticut in New York and has provided services to individuals with disabilities for over 60 years. Disability Solutions is a consulting arm of Ability Beyond, and it was really created to help employers implement successful initiatives to attract, hire, and retain talent with all types of disabilities. Our clients across the country include Pepsi, CenterPoint Energy, Synchrony, Bank of America, and many, many more you can see on your screen. Our motto is changing minds and changing lives. So we like to change the minds of employers through education such as this, success stories, and proven methods, which then result in the changing of lives of job seekers with disabilities, turning into employees working for our clients. Paige, I'll throw it over to you.
All right, thanks, Kevin. My name is Paige Porter. I'm Director of the House Skills. We do ADHD and executive function job coaching. So we work with individuals, and we also serve as an ADA accommodation vendor to companies, working with a lot of companies in tech, healthcare industries, law, and other fields. We work with companies and individuals to help accommodate employees with ADHD, autism, dyslexia, and other neurodiversity at work. And so I'm excited to join you here, Kevin, today. Thank you.
Thank you, Paige. All right, so one of the first questions we hear at Disability Solutions is really, what is a disability? So again, Disability Solutions, we help the employers implement successful initiatives. And one of the first steps we really take when starting to work with an employer is a lot of education up front. And that's a part of our Changing Minds and Changing Lives motto. So let's take a look. What defines a disability? So let's start with the ADA. The Americans with Disability Act was signed in 1990 by President George H.W. Bush, later amended by his son George W. in 2008. And the ADA is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination based on disability. Now, the ADA defines a disability as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of major life activities. It also could be a person who has a history or record of such impairment, or a person who is perceived by others of having such impairment, or a mental condition that limits a person's movements, senses, or activities. So I've underlined a few key takeaways here. Again, physical or mental. It limits one or more major life activities. It could actually be a history or a record, such as a cancer survivor, and it limits a person's movements, senses, or activities. When one thinks of disabilities, they typically tend to think of only those with those physical disabilities initially, or they immediately might think of that symbol of disability, which is a wheelchair. But I want you to realize that 70% of disabilities are actually invisible. Disabilities such as depression, PTSD, anxiety disorders, ADD, ADHD, asthma, cancer survivor, someone with diabetes, all are under the category of invisible disabilities. Now, we train employers all across the country, and many people are quite surprised when they find out that they actually fit the definition of having a disability. Now, half the battle is awareness, again, changing minds and changing lives. A few individuals you may recognize with disabilities on your screen right now. You got the multi-talented Julia Louis-Dreyfus of Seinfeld and Veep fame, who is a cancer survivor. Tom Cruise on your bottom left, he overcame dyslexia to be very successful. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson on your top right, he came back a couple of years ago. He came out and openly discussed about his depression he had as a young adult. And on your bottom right, who usually does presentations with me, is significantly less famous. And that's my friend and colleague, Keith Meadows. He may not be rich and famous as the other three pictured here, but he does have something in common with all these individuals, and that he has a hidden disability. Now, Keith has severe asthma, a hidden disability. He was hospitalized a lot as a child, and he actually carries an inhaler with him at all times just in case he needs it. And if we think back to the ADA's definition of a disability, Keith here does fit into a person with a disability, as it does limit one or more of his major life activities. Now, again, I want you to keep in mind that 70% of disabilities are hidden or not readily noticeable. It's very important to remember when you're thinking about attracting, recruiting, and hiring people with disabilities, and especially when you're managing talent with disabilities. Again, we usually shock a lot of people when we mention that these conditions on your screen are actually classified as disabilities. Most people simply view them as medical conditions and do not really know that they fit the definition of a person with a disability. Let's take a look at some myths and stigmas. So a few of these examples on the left side of your screen, they might seem like something we're not hearing in 2020, but we do. We still hear a lot of these fears and stigmas, especially when talking to potential employer clients, and really outside the workplace as well. Our major job here at Disability Solutions, again, is that education. We want to debunk these thoughts and these concerns and these typical myths and stigmas. Again, we work with employers across the country, and there's two things that we hear. People with disabilities can't do our jobs, and we don't hire people with disabilities. We honestly hear it all the time. It's 2020, and we're still hearing this kind of stuff. And I can guarantee you, we've worked with everyone, right? So whatever open positions you have right now at your employment, I guarantee you that the right person, right? The right person with a disability can do each and every one of them. Again, Disability Solutions, we've hired warehouse workers, we hired department managers, sales reps, engineers, scientists, all people with disabilities doing all these different types of jobs, from the mailroom to the boardroom. Again, the right talent for the right job is what we're looking for. Stephen Hawking, on your right-hand side, not a great ideal candidate for a delivery driver or a warehouse work, but actually was very successful in a few other fields. So we want to make sure that you know that not every person with a disability is going to be that prototypical person using a wheelchair or someone who has autism. There's another stigma is people with mental health disorders are dangerous, as we're told by the news or Hollywood. It's just not true. These and other ones on your screen are really, they really perpetuate awful stereotypes about people with disabilities. We want to make sure we challenge you to change that thinking. And especially as employers out there, you definitely have a huge power to break some of these myths and stigmas by hiring this great talent. So I like to talk about the opportunity of hiring people with disabilities. As of 2018, roughly 1 in 4 Americans have some type of disability, which really makes them the largest talent pool in the United States. And again, typically untapped pool of talent. As we all know, the unemployment rate fluctuates from time to time. It's a little shaky right now, and however, one number does stay consistent. It's not as consistent right now, but one number usually is consistent, is that the unemployment rate of people with disabilities is typically double that of the employment rate of those without disabilities. A few factors include, some of those fears and stigmas that employers still have around hiring people with disabilities that we just talked about. They're actually also could be possibly pigeonholed into the same entry-level jobs, and also face other, barriers to employment, such as transportation, if they so far required it. Again, this talent ranges from transitioning high school students coming out with learning disabilities who really haven't picked up any of those unhealthy work habits yet, to baby boomers with years of experience and degrees who possibly aged into a disability, and also everyone in between. And also, if you're an employer out there looking to diversify your workforce, I like to say that disabilities do not discriminate. Employers are looking always for innovative ways to attract and hire from other diverse populations. And we know diversity, right? It's been told that it's, increases productivity, it increases creativity. It also really affects your internal and external reputation as an employer. So much like the veteran population out there, individuals with disabilities, they really do hit on all diversity metrics, including the numbers you can see up there, right? African Americans, Hispanics, veterans, women, Asian, all across the board. You can see that really, really great diversity within disability. Now let's focus on the market value associated with hiring the talent with disability. Again, 1 in 4 Americans have some type of disability. And aside from that talent value that you're going to get, tapping into this untapped talent pool is going to increase your business and really launch your company into a new market of customers. Taking a look at the numbers, you can see that out of 70 million families out there, there are 20 million families that have at least one member of the family with a disability. That's a lot of potential customers for your employer. People with disabilities also account for spending power worth over $645 billion. We've seen studies that show about 80% of individuals prefer to support companies who hire people with disabilities. I think the other 13% are just neutral, maybe. And again, we like to say that people with disabilities are truly fiercely loyal with these purchasing dollars. They're not just people with disabilities, but their families, their friends, and they are consciously selecting products and services over the competitor. Again, we work with Pepsi a lot, and you can just ask my wife how much I make her buy, and our family purchases a lot of Pepsi products, Quaker Oats, granola bars, Gatorade instead of Powerade, Aquafina instead of Dasani. We very much support all the Pepsi products because we've seen what they've done with us in the last 8 years, and that same shared belief of supporting people with disabilities and other diversity groups. So again, the spending power does go to companies who do foster inclusion. And the disability community, again, very large community, and they do take notice. Paige, I'll throw it over to you.
All right, thank you, Kevin. And we work with a lot of times with companies, right? Once you have hired that diverse talent and those employees with disabilities, and like Kevin is saying, a lot of times we see that not only can these employees do the job, but oftentimes they bring value beyond what most employees do. They have an ability to look at things with different perspectives and take leadership skills because they've had to learn them in their life, and oftentimes coming along with a lot of different value adds for companies internally as well. So when we are working with companies, we do both consulting, helping them support their employees, and then working with the employees directly as well on executive functioning skills. And when we're talking executive functioning skills, we're talking about things like planning, prioritizing, time management, breaking down tasks. When we come up with a plan, actually following it instead of procrastinating. Now, of course, we know that we all struggle with some of these sometimes, but there's some people that struggle with some of these a lot. And that's okay, because there's a lot that we can be doing to support our employees at work and to really help our neurodiverse employees excel in the workplace, to become more successful, more effective, happier, and help you improve retention of that diverse talent that you worked so hard to get. Okay. Next. So today, I want to tell you a story about 3 different employees we've worked to accommodate. Kind of talk you through what they were going through, action steps we took, and some techniques you can use with your employees, as well as outcomes. So I want to start by telling you about Emily. Emily works in the tech industry, and she came to me and she said, I want my actions to match my intentions. I have really good intentions, but my actions disappoint me. And Emily went on and on with examples where she felt like she wasn't doing what she wanted to. She'd say she'd get something finished, but wouldn't. She'd say she'd respond, but she wouldn't. And Emily was really upfront with me. She said, you know, my company is losing money because of me. Now, we started with assessing. Assessment, I think when we're helping our employees, it is one of the most important steps because people struggle with sometimes the same thing for many different reasons. So when we got into it, it turned out that Emily was really struggling with planning and prioritizing. So we approached it from scheduling, many ways of coming out with how do you plan your time. And the first thing we did is we had Emily pull open her calendar, and we looked at her calendar, but we were to kind of complete it. So we had her add in all of her appointments, all of her meetings, all of her deadlines, even things like that dentist appointment. We had her add in the time when she had to go offline to help her kids get online for remote learning, right? Really putting all the hard times in her calendar in one color. Secondly, walked through, and for all of those, we attached action items when needed. For example, she had a status update for her project every Thursday morning. And oftentimes she'd show up and not be prepared. And so we walked through what are the actual steps that you need to do to prepare for that meeting. And we signed timelines. And then third, for her week, all of these prep items that she needed to do, we actually gave them spots on her calendar, put them in there, reserved that time right then in a different color. And all of a sudden, it gave her this working document to use. It gave her a plan for when she didn't have a meeting, what was she actually using that time for and prioritizing the most valuable items and what needed to be done. It allowed her to help make realistic commitments, say no when there just was not room, and ask for help, but ask for help with plenty of notice so that the other people could step in versus having it be the last second and not having the product she needed for the client. Now, when we are working with plans, we look at them as two tiers. The first tier was, what is the plan? And that plan worked beautifully for Emily. It helped her organize her time. It helped her days go more smoothly. But then the second part, which is just as important, is how do we keep these going, right? A lot of times we'll see plans that are really exciting and work great for a week, but kind of die off. So we worked on a maintenance plan. How do you use this day to day? And what is that weekly routine where you go and you plan out further? And then we watched it, right? And sort of helped her nurture the plan as she needed. Next. Kevin, 2 clicks there, please. Thank you. And now, followed up with Emily. She was doing great. We took a couple of months off and we had a follow-up. And I asked her how things were going, and she said, I finally feel confident. Now, if I say that I'm going to do something, then I do it. So we helped Emily find that congruity between how she wanted to be doing things and what she was actually doing. Next. The biggest takeaway I want you to get from Emily's story is that executive functions matter a lot. They allow us to live our lives more the way we want. They allow our actions to match our intention. And executive functions don't only affect us day to day, they affect us overall in our career. They affect our ability to make money, save money, communicate with people, and overall life satisfaction. And the great news is that there is a lot that we can do to help our employees at work for their existing roles and moving forward. Next. The second story I want to tell you about is a client I worked with named Jim, who works in the healthcare industry. And when his company asked us to work with him, I had a conversation with him and he said, I need to stop being the one that doesn't know what's happening in meetings and always needs others to pick up my slack. And he went on about examples again about how he felt like he wasn't getting done what he needed to, about deadlines he was missing. And he'd even been chewed out in meetings recently a couple times by his boss and by his coworkers. And he said, I don't blame them. I am not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I get why they are frustrated with me. Now, I bring up Jim after Emily because they had a lot of similarities coming in, but it was happening for very different reasons. Emily was struggling with that planning and prioritizing piece, but Jim was really struggling with his working memory, remembering what he needed to do, and his focus of in the moment, staying engaged and staying focused on both what he was being told and what he needed to follow up on. And so after we'd kind of determined Jim's why is this happening, it helped us inform what to do about it. So we started with helping him around meetings, because Jim had a really meeting heavy workflow where he'd have a meeting, he was supposed to go do things, and they'd come back and meet again to go over it. And Jim said, honestly, a lot of times I don't even know why I'm in the meeting. And then I leave and I still don't really know why I've been there. So I said, okay, let's figure that out first. Why are you in these meetings? And Jim came up with 2 questions that he started asking almost everyone who invited him to a meeting. 1, what would you like me to do or bring to be well prepared for this meeting? 2, what takeaways would you like me to get out of this meeting? And it was really helpful because all of a sudden, Jim knew ahead of time how to prepare. He was coming to meetings, he could participate, he could be engaged. And it totally helped change his way he approached it. He was part of it instead of kind of sitting on the sideline. He was still having a little bit of trouble with focus closer to the end of the meetings, and then the takeaway of what was he supposed to do afterwards, following through on that. And so we came up with a system for him to work with within the meetings of notes. And Jim actually brought up notes, and he said, notes help me focus. I know they help me focus, but I hate doing them, and I just can't make myself. So I said, well, show me some of your notes. And Jim pulled out these notes from a meeting 3 months earlier, the last time he'd taken notes in a meeting, and they were beautiful. They had headings, they had subheadings, the bullets were perfectly lined up. I mean, really just incredible notes by many measures, but it was too much effort that he was having to put in, and it was strenuous for him within the meeting, and he was avoiding it because of that. So we came up with a system where the only structure Jim had to write on his notes was just at the top. He had to write the names of the people, and he had to write the date. And then his notes, he could just write. He could write in paragraphs, he could write bullet points, he could write abbreviations, sentence fragments, whatever he wanted, except that when there was a takeaway, Jim would put a star next to it. And he'd go over the star 5 times, so it would kind of stand out in the page. Then the third tier to this is that we came up with a daily routine where in the afternoon at 4:30 every day, he'd sit down, he'd look through his notebook, and all of the starred items he would turn into calendar events. And once they got onto his calendar, he would do it. But it was that piece of knowing what to take away and then remembering to act on it later. And so through this system, we were really able to find Jim some nice balance at work. Next. So I talked to Jim a while out, and he said, I'm catching people off guard with how on top of it I am. I'm helping everyone else figure out their next steps. It feels good to be that guy. Next. So the takeaways I want you to get from Jim's story. 1, when working with employees that are struggling, we need to figure out why. It's really easy to sit back and make assumptions or look at kind of this simple answer, but a lot of times it's a little more complicated than that, and we need to do that assessment of why, right? Jim and Emily were struggling for very different reasons, needed very different approaches. Secondly, we need to come up with a plan that works for them. I can't say enough that I think customization is really important. And if you look at, for example, Jim's notes, his old notes were much more beautiful, but they did not work for him. It was not a functional tool for him, versus his new notes are helping him be successful, helping him be engaged, and helping him do his job well. So focusing on a customized plan that's going to work for them, and sometimes that means getting kind of crafty and working outside of the box. Next. All right, the final story I want to talk to you about is Ryan. So Ryan was the project manager. And when we started working with Ryan, he said, I'm tired of living in chaos. I'm always remembering something I need to do at the last second or when it's too late. Ryan's overall stress level was very high, and a lot of it was coming from just not having things go the way he wanted to, having a lot of things at the last second, always that final rush. And when we started to look at it, we identified what is really common a lot of times is kind of some disconnected pieces that are seemingly disconnected pieces that we can approach to really help. So the first thing we did with Ryan is we worked on his morning routine. As a product manager and in his role, he was able to show up at work whenever he wanted to, kind of, and that was really hard for him. It seemed great in many ways, but it wasn't enough structure. And so we built in, when do you need to wake up? How do you need to wake up? And what are the steps you need to take at what time to start your day off the right way? I really encourage companies when we're working with their employees to allow us to address things outside of the work hours. If you don't, I think you're leaving a lot on the table because there's not clear-cut lines. And when it's, helping somebody's day begin well, or helping them come up with a routine at night so they're not going to bed at 2 in the morning, right? Those things bleed into the workday, and addressing them can really help the efficiency and the performance of the employee at work. Secondly, within these big, we work with a lot of project managers, and we have these big wide open roles, right, where there's not as much structure. And so we need to help them build structure. So with Ryan, we work to break down both monthly, weekly, and daily benchmarks for how is this structured to get you from now to that 2-month out deadline. And from there, once he had a plan, once these were smaller tasks, he started doing things. He'd been really procrastinating because it seemed so far out, or it seemed boring and he just didn't want to do it. He'd do it next week. But once he had this plan, he had this process to follow, he was able to do so. And finally, the third thing we really worked on with Ryan was how to ask for help. This is something we work with people on a lot of. One, how do you actually initiate that conversation? But then what do you ask? How do you ask questions that are going to get you the information you need? How do you prepare for that? How do you talk to different stakeholders, especially if there's frustrations and maybe they're difficult conversations to have? But for Ryan, that information would allow him to move through instead of stalling out on his project and resulting in this chaos. Next. Now, Ryan, he said after we'd done this work and after he'd had some time for it to settle in and see the changes, he said, I enjoy work now. We came up with great strategies, and now that I have a plan, work isn't overwhelming anymore. I just had by far my best performance review yet. Next. So the big takeaway I want you to get from Ryan's story is we need to be working on small, achievable systems and structures. We don't tackle everything at once, right? But we start to pick out kind of those keystone behaviors that we can help them come up with systems and strategies around in order to make the changes. Research really shows us we need to be using and challenging our executive functions and helping our employees use and challenge their executive functions in order to improve them, but we can't overwhelm them. So we need to really work to calibrate what is the right speed to move at. And a lot of times the feedback we hear is that these things snowball in a positive way, right? We help them create structure in one area and it bleeds into others and create more stability across the way. A lot of times we're helping them do well with their job and also be more comfortable within their role. Next. So again, really this process of executive functions put us in control of helping our actions match our intentions. They do matter a lot. We need to figure out why in order to come up with a plan, and those plans need to be a series of small, achievable steps to use and challenge our executive functions at the right level. I really think it's an exciting era. There's so much we can do, both for ourselves and for our employees. And so please let me know too how we can support you during this question time of what questions you have around how we can help or how you can be supporting your employees in the workforce.
Thank you, Paige. I appreciate the examples. And as we say a lot with, when working with employers seeking to start hiring people with disabilities, they always ask how are we going to manage the employees, or what if they need some extra help? And I always say your tools that you're providing right now are good for all employees. Same thing with accommodations. I always hear, oh, we're scared about accommodations. Well, with COVID hitting and everything, you're providing all these new accommodations to employees without disabilities from working from home, things that people with disabilities have been asking for forever. and finally we're
Yes,
able to,
absolutely.
now we're able to assist those individuals with or without disabilities at home. So same thing goes with here. These are good tools for everyone, disability or not, which we always find when we find out new solutions on how to support a new or current employee with a disability. So again, thank you. We're at half an hour right now, but we will stick around for some questions if you have them. Again, hover over that menu bar, hit the Q&A button, type in your question. We'll be happy to answer it. In the meantime, I'll put up our contact information. So again, any questions, just hover over that Q&A bar. Sorry, the menu bar, and hit the Q&A button. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks for joining, Stephanie.
All right, looks like we have no questions. So I appreciate the nice comments in the chat bar. And again, here's my contact information is up there. I'll leave that for about 30 more seconds, and I'll put Pages up for 30 seconds more. And if there are not any more questions, we will end the presentation. Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone, for joining. Thanks, Kevin, for hosting.
Thank you, Paige. Thank you, Casey. Appreciate it. All right. Thanks again for joining. See you soon. Bye-bye.